Coming up, we're coming down to the wire on the election. Who will be the next president of the United States? We'll discuss that next on America's Hope, which starts now.
This is America's Hope from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Kelly Wright.
Hello, I'm Kelly Wright. Welcome to America's Hope. We're glad that you could stop by, and we do appreciate you being here wherever you are. Listen, I've always said this, and I mean it. We do sincerely hope that you're safe and well, taking care of yourself and your family, because you and they matter. And of course, we're coming down to the wire on this election, the presidential election of 2024. The sides are clearly divided. There's a lot of undecided people, and they're trying to make up their minds who is the right choice. Is it the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, or is it the former President of the United States, Donald Trump? That's a question that only you, the voter, can decide. And on this program, we've discussed how it's important that you pray, that you vote, and then you stand. And as you make that stand, stand for America. And that is up to you how you choose to do that. But tonight we're going to give you a little bit more insight to both candidates. We're going to hear from the writer, the speech writer of former President Donald Trump, and hear his take on who the former president is. He'll be joining us. F.H. Buckley is the speech writer. He joins us in a moment. And then we're also going to hear from Timothy Allen Simon, a man who has known the vice president for more than 30 years. He's known her as Kamala, and while they may disagree on various issues, he will discuss the type of person that she is. So let's get started. And welcome once again to America's Hope. I'm joined now by F.H. Buckley. He is the foundation professor at the Scalia School of Law at George Mason University. He joins us now to discuss the presidential campaign, plus his new book, The Roots of Liberalism. And Mr. Buckley states that conservatives are the only liberals left. Frank, it's good of you to join us this hour. And I need to point out that you have written speeches. You served as the speechwriter for President Trump when he served in office, and his family, by the way, in 2016 and also 2024. Of course, he's candidate Trump trying to get elected once again. But you have a lot to say about this presidential race. Let's start with what's top of mind with you right now concerning the race.
Well, it looks good at the moment, but, I am by nature a cautious person, so I'm going to keep my fingers crossed.
When you write for him, and you've written many speeches for him, what does he like to get across when he's actually going according to the teleprompter?
You know what? People fault him for being too unscripted. Okay, the fact is, that's what appeals to people when they look at the contrast between him and a totally packaged Kamala Harris. Right? He comes across as an authentic human being, and of her, we have some doubts, right? So all those ad libs, the dancing, all that stuff, the guy's a human, right? We can relate to that. So that's all positive.
It's all part of him going off script. So, Frank, you've known him for quite some time now, and anytime you're a speechwriter, you actually get into the mind of the person you're writing for, and of course, you also have written speeches for the family. Who is Donald Trump, the man beyond how he's perceived by the media and by people who really don't understand his brand of politics and his style of politics?
Well, he's not an ideologue, right? He's a guy focused on things that work. I mean, that's his, that was his business. And he's applying those business skills to America. And he's saying, there's a lot of stuff out there that isn't working. And if you're a left-wing ideologue, you don't get it. It doesn't matter to you. But he gets it. And the American people get it, that things have not been working for them. So that's, I think, what we need, right? We need something constructive. We need a candidate who's on the side of ordinary Americans and not some elite. And that's what he communicates, and that's what he is.
How is he able to resonate with so many millions of people? You've just defined who he is, but how does that messaging from Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, and now running to get elected once again, how does that resonate with the American people who support him?
Well, most Americans recognize things are broken. I mean, what's obvious in the polls is we're not happy with the direction of the country. And if we think about it a little bit, we're going to focus on things like crime, right, or immigration. And people on the left say, no, no, these are really not issues. And that's why we don't believe them anymore, because we know they're issues. And we've had one person saying, this is it, this is the problem, and I'm going to fix it. So it's really simple when you get down to it. He's willing to talk about the issues that really bother people. The other people are willing to try to hide it under all the massive support they get from the left-wing media.
And Frank, when you talk to him, does he convey to you what his heart's desire is for America? I mean, obviously, on the campaign trail, people can argue about Donald Trump from both sides of the spectrum and both sides of the aisle. But at the end of the day, many people will look at him and say, well, he really does care about the country that he has built his wealth on, as well as the country's status as people perceive us throughout the world.
Right. And, I think we also get that he's taken a number of really unfair hits. All the lawfare, all the allegations about him, all the lies that have been tossed about him. So, we get that he's trustworthy, and the messages we're getting from the liberal media, that's not trustworthy. He gets it.
He gets it, and he still goes after it, is what I hear you telling me. Why does he stay in the game, in the fight?
The only explanation is the guy's a patriot. I mean, look, he's the only guy who ever came to Washington and lost money. Everybody else comes here and they make out like bandits, right? And if they leave office, they've got book deals, they've got all sorts of stuff. He, on the other hand, is less wealthy than he was in 2015. So he's a patriot. He could have easily retired on the basis of, I had a successful term in office, right? I don't need this. The only thing motivating him at this point is he cares about the country.
And Frank, where does he think the country is going, and how have you written to that for his speech writing?
Well, we've been switching back and forth in the polls, and it's sort of a 3 to 4% right in the middle. And these guys are not ideologues. They're basically patriots. They're liberals. I wrote a book called The Roots of Liberalism to describe all this. And what I said is that, most Americans have a strong sense about certain things. One of them is we don't like racialized politics. That's something that Democrats do. And we don't like restrictions on free speech. And that's something Democrats do. And we revere the founders of the country. And the Democrats say they're horrible, evil people, and American history is just a list of things that should never have happened. So, that broad middle ground of America resonates to Trump because he, like them, is essentially a liberal. That was my argument in my book.
Yeah, and in your book, The Roots of Liberalism, you state, and I've stated this before in introducing you, that conservatives now are the only liberals left, meaning what's happened to the liberals who were there?
Well, if you go back 50 years, there weren't all that great differences between them. I mean, I'm a great fan of Dwight Eisenhower, who was a great liberal, right? The history of the GOP is a history of people like Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt and Eisenhower. And Trump is, I think, in that tradition, right? Whereas on the left, see, the left believed in free speech when they thought they needed protection. But when they ascended to control, all of a sudden free speech got in the way. It got in the way of their desire to control people and shut people down. So they gave way when they thought they were in power. Well, that's why conservatives are the people who have a vested interest in liberalism. They're the only liberals around right now.
From a cultural perspective right now, the president or the former president of the United States has been dealing with the transgender issue. He's also dealt with the abortion issue. Most notably, he has spent a lot of money in his campaign to address the transgender issue as well as what goes on in schools. Talk to me about that. Where is he going with this in terms of defining what people have stated to him about their concerns about the transgender issue, as well as what's happening in schools with school-age children?
Well, first off, Trump is not someone who is, in any sense ideologically opposed to gay people. He's supportive of them. The problem with the transgender issue is it's a matter of people on the extreme left trying to force their views on ordinary Americans. So ordinary Americans at this point with kids in school have to worry about, whether or not some social worker is going to show up in their doorstep and say, oh, I think your kid's transgender and you don't respect that, we're going to take them away from you. Or they have kids who are, they have girls who are playing in basketball teams and all of a sudden they're up against a male, right? And they know that that's unfair. So, when the left so violates ordinary norms of civility and fairness and good judgment in all these issues, it's only because they think they're in power and they can do whatever they want. And that sense of the arrogance of power is something that really is communicated to ordinary Americans.
I'm talking to F.H. Buckley. We'll be back with more in just a moment. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'm delighted to be talking to F.H. Buckley. He is the foundation professor at the Scalia School of Law at George Mason University. Let me stop there for a moment, Frank. The Scalia School of Law, Antonin Scalia, a Supreme Court justice that many people revered and liked him, even though he was conservative. He had relationships with people on the left and people on the right. Talk to me about Antonin Scalia, the Supreme Court justice who died while serving in office. And of course, so many people remember his contributions to this nation.
He was, I think, a common sense conservative. There was nothing extreme about Scalia. He was a person who took an intelligent view about the limits of a court to impose its views on the rest of Americans. He was a believer in democracy, and he knew that democracy is threatened when courts decide they can, rule on behalf of the people without giving them a choice. That's, for example, what Roe v. Wade was all about. I mean, Roe v. Wade took the issue of abortion away from voters, and he thought that that was a mistake, and so does the current Supreme Court. And now it's an issue for democracy. So that generally is what Scalia wanted, and I think it's a very American sentiment.
And based on that, what do you think about the criticism lodged against the former president, Donald Trump, for what happened as a result of him appointing 3 conservative justices to the Supreme Court who made that ultimate decision to reverse Roe versus Wade?
Well, as I say, that decision was one which returned the issue to the American people, which is where it belonged. So, there's nothing wrong with that. If you object to it, I think what you're saying is these are issues that ordinary people shouldn't get to vote on, right? These are issues that only the elite get to decide upon. Well, I don't see it that way, and I think most Americans don't see it that way. So what we're going to end up with is good old federalism, the laboratory of the states, and states will find their way. They'll respond to what the people want. And I think, in the end, it's going to be sliced down the middle. And that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, Frank, another topic that the former president is often criticized for is his relationship with African Americans and Hispanic Americans. Yet it's been duly noted throughout this election, throughout this campaign, that many African American men support the former president and will likely vote for him, which has complicated things on the other side of the aisle for Kamala Harris. Why do you think the former president has been able to attract so many African American men to support him?
Because I think the main victims of liberal policies in this respect have been African Americans. So, when you're talking about crime and crime victims, mostly you're talking about African Americans. And if you're talking about people who have problems getting a job, you're talking about immigration and you're talking about jobs being taken away from them by illegal immigrants. And so black people had it better off during Trump's first 4 years in office. And I think they'd like to give another 4.
So you're saying they'd like to have another shot at what they believe they experienced during the Trump years, as opposed to the past 3.5 years of the Biden era?
Exactly right. African Americans did really relatively well. The wage gap between white and black was never narrower than under President Trump. So they did well.
Frank, another topic is Israel and Ukraine. The president, or the former president, stated he can end this problem with Ukraine while serving as president-elect. And he's also been very supportive of Israel. What does he mean by being able to? I mean, that's the mystery that many people are asking, and they want to know the answer. How can he solve the Ukraine problem as president-elect? What does he see that the rest of the world does not see?
Well, I think I could talk to that issue. I helped write his foreign policy speech in 2016, and I know what the game plan was. The game plan was, look, we're going to go to the parties, right, the president of Ukraine and Vladimir Putin. We're going to sit down and we'll craft a deal. I mean, what we're really looking for is some kind of grand bargain. Congress of Vienna in 1875 was like this. When two countries are at war and people are dying, you want to stop that. So the way to stop that, roughly, is to tell parties, we're not going to support the war in Ukraine, and what you're going to have to come up with is a deal that satisfies everybody. And we know roughly what that deal is, right? The deal is Crimea is Russian. It will stay Russian. It's always been Russian. The eastern part of Ukraine has always been Russian speaking. Fine, we can have a referendum on the subject. I think I know who would win at that point. But, it's not that we're on the side of Putin, we're on the side of peace. And the people who are on the side of continued war are the people who want to continue supporting that war. And that's the Democratic Party. So, the deal can be done. You might ask, well, why didn't it happen? Real simple. It really didn't happen because the Dems launched their big lies over Trump and Russia, right? The Russian collusion hoax, which was a lie put upon the American people by the Hillary Clinton campaign. So politically, that got in the way of any kind of a deal. Well, right now, we know that the Russian collusion hoax was a lie. I think Trump's hands are untied on that issue. I think he will do that which he initially wanted to do back in 2016, which is cut a deal, right? Tell both sides, cut it out. We've got to have peace. And you're not going to get any support from us until you do that.
Yeah, and Frank, with the other situation with Israel having to deal with Iran and its proxies, and of course, somewhere lurking in the background of Iran is Russia and China, keeping in mind that Iran's oil basically flows to China, China being one of our most principal adversaries, and of course, Israel being our most devoted and important ally in the Middle East. What would this former president do as the president of the United States to solve the conflict in Israel?
Well, I don't see Russia as part of the problem. I see part of our goal with Russia winning it to neutrality and away from China. China is the principal enemy here. As for Israel, recall that in all this time, Biden and Harris said, oh, Israelis, no, don't go into Rafah, right? but it was the IDF that just now, a few days ago, routed out Sinwar in Rafah that represented such an important milestone in the history of that war. So yeah, I think you have to realize that, we don't have permanent enemies, we don't have permanent friends, but Israel's on the side of democracy in this one, and we're friends with it, and we have to support it in its fight against Iran, right? As has been said, if Israel took out Iran's nuclear facilities, that would be a gift to mankind in general.
Frank, another question I've got to ask you is that the former president has a lot of support among evangelical voters. As you know, the Christian bloc is one of the largest voting blocs in America, and it's often overlooked by many candidates on both sides. But yet, Republicans have been very loyal to that base, and that base has been very loyal to the former president. Having said all of that, how do you define the faith of Donald Trump?
I think he's a Christian in a kind of Protestant, non-denominational way, but he gets it that Americans are largely a Christian or Judeo-Christian country. You mentioned evangelicals. I should note that the median voter in America is actually a Catholic. Catholics voted massively pro-Trump in 2016, against Trump in 2020. This time, the polls tell us they're solidly pro-Trump. That's the election, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're talking about a large base of faith-based people who are out there, and most of them, well, many of them rather, are being galvanized to vote. And then some, quite candidly, have chosen to sit it out, believe it or not, because of the former president's bombastic style and some of the things that he's prone to do in his ad libs when he's talking to people. Some of the demonizing of Kamala Harris and other people that he views, the enemy within. How do you square that with Donald Trump when he has to talk to people in a more conciliatory way, as some people are wishing that he would do?
I will give you this. He's not your picture of the complete gentleman, okay?
Really?
Yeah, I know I'm shocking you, right? But, he's a regular guy, okay? And people react to regular guys. And I think in the end, that kind of slippage will be really slight. I think what's more important is the way in which that block of voters, whether it's evangelicals or Catholics or Jewish Americans, have been dissed by the left. They've been left behind, and they know it. I mean, like we're kind of smart enough to understand when people don't like us.
You're a professor at George Mason University. We saw last year what happened on many college campuses, some of the elite collegiate institutions, halls of academia, where people were protesting in the streets, saying death to Israel, death to America, and demonizing and going after Jewish students. How did this former president look at that? And is that an issue that he would address if he becomes the next president of the United States?
We're talking about something that's happening on college campuses. So it's a university problem. Who ever thought, by the way, in the past, we'd see mobs, pro-Hamas mobs in university? Whoever thought that? Right? It's like the dark days of Nazi Germany. Well, much of this is a university problem, and much of it is a city police problem, and much of it is a state problem. But it's also a national problem, because what we're doing is we're sending a lot of federal money to those institutions. And we got to think about stopping that. Right. I'll tell you one thing about university administrators. I mean, they may be Democrats, but more than anything, they love money. Right. And if you tell them we're going to cut off the money, nothing will get their attention faster than that. That's something the feds can do. And that's something the Donald Trump presidency can start thinking about. I think we're going to do directions like that.
And would he perhaps put the Abraham Accords back on the table?
He will certainly try. I mean, the Abraham Accords were one of the great foreign policy triumphs in the last 50 odd years. Look, I know the foreign policy people in the Trump administration. And, I kept saying, because I was close with Jared, what about this? What about some deal? And they said, oh, that's crazy. That'll never happen. Well, Jared was smarter than they were.
What's your hope for America?
My hope for America is that it's a very profound hope. And whatever happens in the near future, Americans are a decent, charitable, benevolent, sensible, liberal people. And in the end, it's going to turn out okay.
That's an expression of faith, my friend. F.H. Buckley, Foundation Professor at the Scalia School of Law at George Mason University. He's just written a new book that many of you should check out, The Roots of Liberalism, and he's the speechwriter for Donald J. Trump. Appreciate you being on the program tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Frank. We're coming back with more in just a moment. And welcome back to America's Hope. Joining me now is Timothy Allen Simon. He is a former California Public Utilities Commissioner and Appointments Secretary for the state of California. He served with then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. He owns TAS Strategies, which of course is consulting and legal advice firm that he provides, serving clients on utility infrastructure, energy, broadband, and financial services. And you offer innovative solutions across the entire spectrum of power generation, delivery, and utilization. Timothy, you have been able to do so much throughout the state of California, and you've impacted America with regard to so many different aspects. And you've studied politics. You once served as a Republican. Now you're a free thinker, as you like to say. But you've also known the Vice President of the United States for many, many years before she was even discovered, and went on to become, a prosecutor out there, the Attorney General in California, and then moving on to become the Vice President. How do you assess her campaign?
I think her campaign has been a real challenge for the Vice President. She had what James Carville referenced as a sugar high from the announcement in the Democratic National Convention. But President Trump is a very tactical campaigner, and now she is leveled out. And as pollsters have said, it's a neck and neck race. I think her campaign has had the challenge of time. Money has not been the issue. It's the fact that they had to assemble a campaign team, and the fact that their headquarters is in Wilmington, Delaware, tells you that it is a team and an infrastructure that was built for Joe Biden. So now she had a very narrow window to introduce the country, to her, and to walk away from some statements that she has made in the past that were left of center and probably not within the mainstream. I think she's doing everything imaginable to correct, come to the middle, particularly on areas like energy, but you just can't buy time. Time is a very finite commodity, and I think that's the challenge she faces right now.
And down to the wire now, and many people who are within that undecided column, they don't know her. And as a result of that, they are kind of befuddled about, who do they vote for. They know Donald Trump, the person. They've seen what Donald Trump did as president. They have made their own mind up in terms of will they support him or not support him. But when it comes to the Vice President of the United States, who is she? You know her better than most, Timothy. Who is Kamala Harris? And by the way, let's point out the fact that you've known her as being a Republican and now a man who's independently thinking. And of course, both of you have had your differences on political lines, Republican and Democrat. But who is she, the person, Kamala Harris?
Well, ironically, I'd been in Vice President Harris's company for a number of years, probably going over 30 years, at different gatherings in San Francisco. Even though I was Republican, San Francisco's a Democratic town. So if you're not engaging with Democrats in San Francisco, you're not in the room where it happens. But ironically, the first time we actually had a one-on-one encounter, I was phone banking for her run for district attorney, and the phone banking was being hosted by a Republican. So she's had bipartisan engagement since really the inception of her career. Take it further, when I was appointment secretary to Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, we worked directly with her in funding beds for re-entry, people that were coming out of incarceration and re-entering society. So she was forward thinking. And then even more so, my niece, Latifah Simon, who's running for Congress and was cited by CNN and others as one of the highlights of the Democratic National Convention, she worked for Kamala in developing a smart on crime strategy that went across the nation. She is driven, she is innovative, she is brilliant, despite President Trump's attacking of what he considers her IQ. And, you know, let us not forget, she has been a district attorney, an attorney general, a United States senator out of the fourth largest economy in the world. What does that mean? That Gavin Newsom attends the G7. He's just not a G7 participant. That's how large California is. And I often have to say to my dear Republican brothers and sisters across the country, don't play California cheap. As Governor Schwarzenegger said, we are the nation state. Our size is larger than most nations in the country. So when you come out of California and all of the positions that she has won handedly, then you are very seasoned and very experienced. And that's what we're seeing in Kamala Harris. And then you add going on 4 years as vice president, and she is probably, not me, but political historians have said that she's probably the most qualified candidate for president in our nation's history.
But that messaging, as you know, has been problematic, and in many ways it's been murky and muddied by her opponent, who is very, very look, you got to give it to him. The Donald, or the former president, knows how to campaign and knows how to appeal to his base. And he's even crossed over into some of the places where Kamala Harris would have expected some support. I'm speaking notably about black men. Talk to me about that, because you've seen this this new dynamic that's been taking place.
Well, you know, in every cloud, there's a silver lining. And where I'll give former President Trump credit is that him specifically targeting black men and soliciting their vote is unprecedented. The Democratic Party has always taken the view that black women voted various candidates, whether it was Doug Jones in Alabama or Senator Warnock in Georgia, and even Joe Biden, even though it was James Clyburn who gave the endorsement of Joe Biden, which is probably the most impactful endorsement in American history. I think the Democrats and Vice President Harris are also paying the price for their nomenclature. Their words matter. When you start saying that someone that is illegal is not illegal when they're undocumented, I don't think they realized how offensive that was to those who have been wrapped up in the criminal justice system. Add President Trump's felonies. People criticized him when he said, my mugshot has made me relevant to black folks. Well, you know, I listened to Kevin Hart's Laugh Out Loud station on Sirius XM, and there was a roundtable discussion, and someone said to a Trump supporter, so you're going to vote for a convicted felon? And he said, most of my friends and family are convicted felons. So I think Democrats did not realize, and that their wording on the issue of immigration was actually going to backfire against them, because they created the belief that someone who unfortunately had to live in the shadows was some kind of sacred cow amongst us. I think the intentions were honorable, but the road to hell are paved with bad intentions. Also, Black men, Latinos, other affinity groups, we are not monolithic. You have to meet us where we are if you want our vote and understand our pain and even our hopes and desires. I think adding insult to injury, a man that I admire, by the way, but former President Barack Obama, speaking to Black men, and in some is characterized shaming or lecturing them about being willing to vote for women. Black men have been dealing with our mothers, our sisters, our wives, all of our lives. And it is clear that we are a community that creates some of the most dynamic women leaders that have been supported by Black men, whether it's Shirley Chisholm or Maxine Waters, or I can go on and on and on, Kamala Harris. So I think that Democrats, those chickens finally came home to roost. And President Trump, former President Trump, is the most entertaining candidate in American history. His ability to capture the imagination, and unfortunately the grievance imagination of the American public, is a weapon that is working for him. And Democrats have to come to grips with thinking more about the people that they're offending. They're quick to say who President Trump has offended, and his vitriol is by far toxic. But they fail to accept the fact that their actions also had a bullying or negative impact on certain communities.
I'm talking to Timothy Allen Simon. We're going to take a break, and when we return, we'll talk to him more about what he sees with this particular campaign from Kamala Harris, as well as the other side, Donald Trump, and what he perceives to be the outcome of this election and how America will respond. That's next on America's Hope. Welcome back to America's Hope. Having a wonderful conversation about what's happening on the campaign trail with someone who has known the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, for more than 30 years. He is Timothy Allen Simon, a former California Public Utilities Commissioner and Appointments Secretary for Arnold Schwarzenegger when he served as governor of the great state of California. You've also known Kamala Harris for more than 30 years before she even became known statewide and, of course, nationally, and now, of course, internationally. You've assessed her campaign. You've talked about how difficult the task has been in getting her to be front and center with the American people, to get them to know her. If she's missed the mark on that, and certainly she is extremely qualified, particularly based on how you've identified her credentials and all that she's done, and she's been very forthright about that. Why do you think she has not been able to gain more support this deep into the election and this close to the election?
Well, first off, you have the issue of partisanship in our country. We are probably more divided on a partisan basis than we've ever been historically. And you have certain voters that are going to go with a party line regardless. And that's just how they were raised, and they're not moving out of that. Her challenge has been the swing voters, particularly in the battleground states that will decide the president because of our electoral college. She is having to work against the economic track record of the Biden administration, whereby the achievements of the administration are unprecedented, but inflation has eroded the net positive impact on working families. Getting back to words matter, Democrats are telling people that you're not feeling what you're saying you're feeling because the latest jobs report or the latest interest rate drop and all of these things. I think the messaging should have been, hold on. I'm coming. Hold on. Good times are on their way. And so you had an immediate distrust amongst communities because you're telling me I'm not feeling what I'm feeling. So she has difficulty distinguishing herself from Joe Biden. You also have to take into account that Joe Biden has very high popularity amongst the African-American community. Not only in his selection of Kamala Harris as his running mate, but the appointment of Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court. And I can go on and on and on. The forgiveness, his efforts, even though reversed by the courts. And once again, he's at it to try to forgive student loan debt, which really impacts all people of all colors that are being burdened economically. So you're trying to make a distinction against a man in an administration that you were part of that had significant achievements, but you have to make that those distinctions to capture that swing vote. And that is threading a needle that is not easy. But I believe if anyone can do it, it's Kamala, or the vice president, excuse me, but she has to basically abandon the loyalty and understand that as Oakland Raider owner, former owner, now deceased Al Davis would say, just win, baby, just win.
What are your concerns about America reacting and responding to who will be the next president of the United States, whether it's Vice President Kamala Harris or the former President Donald Trump?
My primary concern is political violence that will result in the aftermath of this election. And we have to remind ourselves our country has a history of political violence from our revolution on to our expansion westward. There are many elements where we as a nation use violence as a means to increase power and what some would call hegemony over certain communities. But there are militia groups that support former President Trump that will probably take action to try to subvert the election results. You also have the political framework in that elections are run by states, and some states are already or have already adopted policies to obstruct the election results, along with the Supreme Court that has demonstrated a majority affinity towards President Trump and his pursuit of executive power beyond probably any president in American history. Hence, he has created a culture or a belief through misinformation that if I lose, it's only because the election was rigged. And to this date, he does not acknowledge the fact that he lost the 2020 election to Joe Biden. So we already have the ingredients in place for unrest. I think we are already ideologically in a civil war. I just hope and pray that it doesn't move into the violent confrontational space. But in my view, I think it is almost inevitable.
You know, having said that, there are some outside forces like Russia and China. It's been reported how they have been trying to maneuver, and I should include Iran as well, how they've been trying to maneuver and manipulate some of the American people to respond with some sort of political intrigue and violence in the wake of the election, regardless of who wins. You've expressed your concerns. What happens if President Trump goes on to win? How will the left respond?
I don't see the threat of political violence from the left, but I do think there will be demonstrations, legal efforts to challenge the results. I think both sides are, have in place a defeat game plan. But I think the potential for violence, from all indications, seems to be coming from the far right or the MAGA movement. But at the end of the day, I believe that if Vice President Harris loses the election, she'll lose with dignity, she'll lose with respect, and will lose with a reverence towards the United States Constitution.
What is your hope for America?
My hope for America is that we could come together as a nation and begin to attack the tough issues that we have as a nation. And that includes putting our resources into communities that have been resource deserts to some degree. You look at the amount of money that is going to the Ukraine war, to the Israel's expansion into the Gaza and Lebanon. You look at the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that we can allocate on a moment's notice. And by the way, I've not seen a vote of a War Powers Act. We have secret wars going on throughout, and particularly in the global South and Africa. I think I'm looking for a country that's saying we have to take care of our interest at home before we can fund interests abroad. Now, we as African Americans have personal experience here. When my father fought in World War II, when he came back home, he could not vote, or he did not have the legal protection of voting. And if he wore his naval uniform in Lake Charles, Louisiana, he could be at risk of being lynched. So we know how the conspiracy theories, white supremacy, as well as a nation's belief that we have to police the world, has had an impact on us. It was referred to as guns and butter. Guns and butter. You can't do both. So it's my hopes that whoever wins this election, they begin to address housing, healthcare, mental health care, and other things that are so important to have a healthy, prosperous society.
Timothy Allen Simon, thank you. Those are issues that we have not heard enough about along the campaign trail. We've heard a lot of demonizing of each other and each party, but we need to get back to the issues. I appreciate you being on the program as always. Thank you, my friend. We're coming back with more in just a moment. Welcome back to America's Hope. I'd like to thank our guests who appeared on the program, Timothy Allen Simon and F.H. Buckley. Certainly both men have worked with leaders in this nation, and they both have a concern about the future and hope of America. And of course, they agree to disagree on who the better choice will be on Election Day and moving this country forward. Well, they resonate what many Americans are feeling right now. But again, as we stated at the top of this program, it's important for each and every one of us to pray, to vote, and to stand for America. And how you do that is between you and your faith in God and the candidate of your choice. The bottom line, though, is that we must determine in order to become a more perfect union, that we learn to spread love, freedom, and peace, and let hope prevail, regardless of who is leading this nation, because we, the people, must understand it's a government by the people, for the people, and of the people. So do your part, America. Pray, vote, and stand, and keep hope alive. Until next time, God bless.